Okay, so to remind ourselves, we're talking about the employment relationship and trying to kind of navigate the framework of what is involved within the employment relationship. And if we look at this second aspect on this little model that we've got, it's all about the nature of work, about the problem of work, and what work means for people. Now, what I want to do in this little video is just to set out some of the key features of what the work experience is like and problematize it, if you like, because quite often, from a human resource management perspective, we treat work as if it is just straightforward. People come to work and, we can try and, develop good practices in terms of management and try and have some kind of meaningful activity at work which allows people to express themselves and so on. But work is regarded generally as an unproblematic issue. Now, another difference with human resource management and employment relations approaches is that there's a tendency here to make work problematic, that there is something fundamental in the experience of work and in the way that work relations are set up, which create difficulties for the experience of work from an employee point of view. So I'm just going to set out some kind of facts and features around this, which give a kind of a flavour to the way in which the employment relations field of study approaches work and some of the priorities and issues which are identified as being important in the employee experience of work, as opposed to the human resource management approach to work, which is all about getting people to do the things that generate organisational success. So we're trying to set things on a little bit of a wider canvas here. So as far as work's concerned, the first thing that is important to state is that for almost all of us, work is the dominant activity in our lives. It's what we spend our time doing. It's what defines us. It's what provides us with our means for living. It generates status. It is the dominant activity within our lives. And as I say, this is something that most of us, the vast majority of us, do. 80% of UK adults are working. So that there isn't, a large group of people, apart from the retired, who aren't engaged with work as an important aspect of our lives. Now, because work is something that we nearly all do, and because work occupies such a large element of our time, then the impact of work on our lives is quite enormous, and that for most of us, and it's very commonplace and common sense simply to recognise that we spend most of our waking lives juggling complex work arrangements, that in itself becomes a central activity in our lives. And that this has obviously particular implications at particular moments in our life. Work is obviously dominant for most of us most of the time. But particularly when we have small children, the relationship between home responsibilities, between care responsibilities, domestic responsibilities, and work responsibilities becomes quite stark. So we talk about the phenomena and the problems associated with what's been called shift parenting, that we become really aware of the importance and the problems of the lack of work-life balance. That there are huge numbers of people for whom this is a massively problematic issue. So just the basic problem of doing work and living life is a kind of central feature of the problem that work occupies for millions of people's lives, and for the vast majority of people's lives. Beyond that, beyond it simply being a kind of logistical challenge, we don't often talk about the misery of work. So in our tradition, where when we talk to the workforce and we raise our eyes away from the kind of the banality of following the bottom line and the search for competitive advantage and all the rest of it, and actually ask people what is their experience of work, we start to get quite a depressing response. So people describe their work in this study here. They describe their work as miserable, as toxic, as soul-destroying, as inadequately rewarded, as dangerous. Now these are all commonplace. This is the experience of work. It's a million miles away from the kind of sanitized view of human resource management, of the search for employee engagement or commitment or whatever. And that's not to minimize those things, but simply to say that we don't pay attention to the actual experience of work. And that's what we're interested in here, that once we stop thinking about work as just a means to generate profit, once we stop thinking about work simply from the point of view of the employer who employs people to get these things done in order to generate profit and maximize competitive advantage, and we start to think about the experience of work from a human perspective, from the perspective of the people who are undertaking that work, it puts an entirely different complexion on matters, and starts to think about the nature of the employment relationship. Where on the one hand, we've got people who are experiencing work in, these kind of miserable terms, truly miserable terms, who are suffering, in their millions, work-related illnesses, where tens of millions of people are not able to work because of illness and injury caused at work. This is the other side of the work story. And so when we're thinking about this, and if we bring this back to the rewards part of this module, and we're thinking about sense of fairness and equity and conflict and the search for cooperation, on the one hand we've got pay and rewards, and on the other hand, well, we might think about performance and job roles and job tasks. But we also have to put this into the equation as well. The experience of work as miserable, soul-destroying, toxic, and all of that, and the illness and the injury and all of those kinds of things. So work, from that sense, is highly problematic. And the balancing of rewards against those kinds of experiences becomes a much more complex process. And the scope for conflict to emerge when people feel inadequately rewarded for the contribution and the sacrifice that work demands of them. That's an insight that's important to consider. We might think about, from a different perspective, that work isn't just about time. It's not just about the logistics of balancing work against domestic responsibilities. It's not even about just the misery of work, but the significance of work in a wider sense to our identity. So what do we do when we meet somebody? What's one of the first things that we ask? We ask them what they do for a living. Work defines us. It tells the person who's asking about our status. It tells them about our class. It tells them about our lifestyle. So work, because it is so dominant, because it is so hardwired into the way that we think about ourselves in this economy and in this society, work becomes absolutely fundamental. So again, the centrality of work, what it means, how it internalizes itself in our minds. Work becomes bound up with our identity, and so the loss of work becomes a loss of identity. The final thing that I want to talk about in terms of the problem of work is the extent to which work is not just of importance to the people who do it, it's not just important to the people who pay for it, it's important at a societal level. So we see work regulated to a greater or lesser extent. We see government pass laws and regulations, rules, systems of justice for managing conflicts at work, which indicates that this is something which we need to pay close attention to, because the state, our society, our government, our politics regards it as being important. We have systems to regulate discrimination between sexes at work. We have regulations about minimum rates of pay, maximum working hours, about all kinds of areas of fairness and justice that go into that. Why do government have such an interest in this? Well, partly because it is of interest to the citizens, because they experience it in all the ways that we talked about as such dominant activity, but because also from a societal level, from an economic level, government is interested in having skilled and motivated workers. They're interested in having an economy which is driven through high pay, which finances the economy. The more that people are in decently paying work and effective work, the more that they can manage and support themselves through work rather than relying on the state. So for all of these reasons, work is central to government, central to the state, central to society, central to the people who do it. And so, to reiterate, to think about reward as the trade-off between the effort that employees give to their employer, we need to consider its centrality from all of these angles. It's not simply about, here are some hours of my day. It's basically about people giving their lives to an organisation, to sacrifice so much of their own lives. And so the balance to be struck in terms of rewards needs to be regarded in those terms, not simply in a more mundane sense.